The highway was supposed to reopen as a sign of order returning to a disrupted night. Instead, it became the stage for chaos that spiraled into catastrophe. On the evening of November 2nd, 2024 in Michigan, a section of Interstate 96 near M52 had been closed for utility work. DTE Energy was installing power lines with the support of state police units. 18 minutes before midnight, traffic was allowed to flow again. And then, without warning, a semi-truck barreled into more than a dozen civilian vehicles. Within seconds, fire engulfed the overpass. Witnesses described an explosion so large it lit the night sky like a battlefield flare. Emergency radio traffic captured the panic of officers who had barely managed to reopen the road before they were forced to shut it down again. A semi fully engulfed, multiple injuries, unclear what the truck was hauling. Calls for ambulances streamed across the airwaves. The sounds of chaos echoed through the police recordings, punctuated by screams, commands, and the frantic movement of civilians trying to drag loved ones from burning cars. The images that emerged in the hours that followed were haunting. Flames consuming rows of vehicles, civilians staggering away from wreckage, officers attempting to triage with little more than flashlights and urgency. By dawn, the smoke still lingered over the charred remains of cars, some crushed beneath the semi. Reports confirmed fatalities. Families were torn apart in an instant. Kimberly Van Horn screamed for her husband Sam, who was later found badly injured. Their son, only 18 years old, was trapped in the back seat before being pulled out. Other families were less fortunate. A brother, a sister, and a daughter burned beneath the collapsed trailer. The scale of destruction was difficult to comprehend. 4 people dead, 17 injured. A crash site that resembled not just an accident but the aftermath of an urban bombing. In the immediate hours, law enforcement struggled to impose order. Some units believed there were no fatalities. Others, operating on separate radio channels, reported bodies. Miscommunication, confusion, and fragmentation defined the early response. A trooper carried victims by hand. Others shouted commands to retreat as fuel ignited again and again. The driver of the semi hauling bananas survived with burns. He later claimed that smoke suddenly filled his cab, blocking his vision. Witnesses contradicted him, saying they had seen him swerving miles earlier. Computer screens lit up in his cab, his driving erratic, fast, distracted. Blood tests showed no alcohol. But suspicion remained that inattention, not mechanical failure, caused the chain of death. Civil lawsuits followed almost immediately. The driver, his company, Coy's Company Incorporated, DTE Energy, the Michigan Department of Transportation, and even the Michigan State Police were all named as defendants. Attorneys argued negligence on multiple fronts. DTE Energy had allegedly begun work under a permit scheduled to start the following day. They had relied on troopers to manage traffic instead of contracting professional control crews. There were no warning signs, no advance notice, nothing to slow or divert heavy trucks on Interstate 96. In this framing, the semi-driver was only the final trigger in a sequence of preventable errors, yet officials resisted responsibility. DTE claimed it had coordinated with state agencies. State police blamed the inattentive trucker. Each institution deflected accountability. The families were left with grief and settlement offers. The trucking company's insurer quickly paid $1 million, the maximum liability limit, to cover 11 civil suits. That sum, spread across lives lost and futures broken, barely touched the scale of loss. To some, it looked less like justice and more like a calculated cap, an attempt to bury the incident under paperwork, payouts, and bureaucracy. Yet what cannot be buried is the perception this creates. Accidents are tragic, but repeated patterns of negligence reflect systems, not fate. And when those systems fail in the United States, the consequences echo far beyond Michigan. They become data points in a larger question. Is the American state capable of maintaining order and safety in its own infrastructure, or are its institutions fraying under the weight of complacency? It is here that the domestic tragedy intersects with the geopolitical lens. For an international observer, This is not just a traffic accident. It is a signal about the reliability of American governance. China, Russia, and other rivals closely track such stories. State media in Beijing frequently highlight American infrastructure failures, collapsing bridges, train derailments, chemical spills, mass shootings, as evidence that the United States is a power in decline. Whether one agrees with this interpretation or not, the raw material is provided by incidents like the crash on Interstate 96. Images of fire consuming civilian vehicles, while troopers stumble in confusion, are broadcast abroad as symbols of disorder. And in the realm of geopolitics, perception can be as powerful as reality. The accident also highlights the deeper American paradox. The United States spends billions on military deployments abroad, maintaining aircraft carriers in the South China Sea, missile defenses in Europe, nuclear submarines in the Pacific. Yet at home, a utility project on a Michigan highway can be managed with insufficient traffic control, resulting in civilian death. The contrast is not lost on foreign analysts. If a state cannot safeguard its own roads, can it credibly claim to safeguard global order? This is not propaganda. It is strategic narrative warfare. Rivals amplify such contradictions to undermine U.S. legitimacy. Allies quietly take note, questioning the resilience of the partner they depend on. In historical perspective, infrastructure failures have often been inflection points. The collapse of Soviet legitimacy in the 1980s was accelerated not only by Afghanistan or nuclear tensions, but by visible failures of domestic provision, food shortages, industrial accidents, transport breakdowns. Each incident chipped away at public confidence and global perception. The Michigan crash is not comparable in scale, but in symbolic terms, it belongs to the same category. A modern industrial power should not allow a preventable chain of errors to culminate in mass casualties on a public interstate. When it happens, the conclusion drawn is that systems are brittle, oversight is weak, and accountability is diffused. From the legal battle that followed, another lesson emerges. Liability in the American system often stops at the insurance ceiling. $1 million spread across multiple victims is a structural cap, not a reflection of actual loss. Civil attorneys may push further against DTE or state institutions, but the pattern is clear. In other advanced economies, state responsibility in infrastructure failure is more centralized and immediate. In Japan, rail accidents trigger resignations. In South Korea, ferry disasters topple governments. In the United States, responsibility diffuses until it evaporates, leaving families in litigation limbo. For adversaries, this looks like dysfunction. For allies, it looks like fragility. And for citizens, it deepens distrust in institutions. The victim's stories cut through the abstraction. Robert Ross, 29 years old, ejected from his vehicle and killed. Brandon Glasgow, 47, a football coach and father, gone in seconds. His sister, Arthuria Watkins, and her daughter, 20-year-old Manessa, consumed by flames. Their families ask the most direct question. What was the truck driver doing that he did not see the brake lights? What were the authorities doing that there were no warnings? These are not just personal laments. They are indictments of a system where failure is normalized. And when normalized, failure breeds repetition. From a geopolitical perspective, incidents like this also intersect with the concept of resilience. Great powers are measured not only by their military reach, but by their ability to absorb shocks, protect citizens, and maintain legitimacy under pressure. The Michigan crash exposes cracks in American resilience. Emergency response was courageous but fragmented. Institutional accountability was partial and deflected. Infrastructure management was sloppy. In the larger strategic contest with China, narratives of American resilience are essential. Washington portrays itself as the guarantor of order in the Indo-Pacific. Yet when highways burn at home due to mismanagement, the image of order is eroded. Beijing does not need to manufacture propaganda. It simply needs to broadcast the reality. One can also frame this in economic terms. The fragility of infrastructure is a liability in global competition. Logistics is not only about ports and supply chains abroad. It is also about highways, bridges, and power grids at home. A system that allows preventable disasters on Interstate 96 will also struggle under the weight of larger crises, whether cyber attacks, natural disasters, or deliberate sabotage. In that sense, the crash is not an isolated event. It is a stress test that the system failed. And in geopolitics, stress tests accumulate until they redefine credibility. Looking forward, the implications are stark. If the American state continues to manage infrastructure projects with fragmented responsibility and minimal accountability, more tragedies will occur. Each will erode public trust. Each will provide adversaries with propaganda fuel. Each will weaken the perception of U.S. resilience. The lesson is clear. Domestic order is the foundation of global credibility. Without it, even the strongest military becomes a hollow projection. The accident in Michigan is not just about 4 lives lost and 17 injured. It is about the perception of whether the United States can govern itself effectively. In an era of great power competition, that perception matters as much as ships and missiles. The cold logic conclusion is therefore uncomfortable but necessary. The Michigan crash reveals systemic negligence, fragmented accountability, and infrastructure fragility. It exposes weaknesses that adversaries can exploit in the global narrative contest, and it underscores a fundamental truth: power begins at home. The United States can only credibly lead abroad if it maintains competence, safety, and resilience within its own borders. Every failure on that front is not just a domestic tragedy, it is a geopolitical signal, and the world is watching.